Let's have a look at the Laetoli footprints. Very famous fossil. Well, it's not actually a fossil, it's an imprint. These we are told, are 3 million years old. Human beings, by the way, proper human beings are reckoned to have existed for about 100,000 years only in an evolutionary timescale. So let's just give you the context. Here's a picture of the place where you can find these Laetoli footprints. In other words, they're in Laetoli. And there are a series of footprints. Here's a large blown up picture of one. And they are claimed to be made by Australopithecus afarensis, because that was a creature that was around at the time that people believed could walk around on 2 feet. Unfortunately, some researchers have recently analysed one of the bones in the foot, the navicula. There's a diagram of the foot for you to show where your navicular bone is. Here it is. It's actually a very important part of your foot because it makes the arch of your feet. We have arched feet, and the navicular bone, the shape of the navicular bone determines the fact that you have an arch or not. And if you don't have a navicular bone, you don't have an arched foot, you have a flat foot. And what they found was the afarensis navicula is designed for flat-footed animals, a bit more like an ape than a human. And the conclusion was that Australopithecus afarensis almost certainly did not walk like us, for starters, and like the hominids at Laetoli. And what they've also did is they basically took somebody who doesn't habitually wear shoes, make them walk around in sand, and you get prints just like you find at Laetoli. So these prints look human, but they are attributed to Australopithecus because humans weren't around 3 million years ago. They're logical, consistent. Well, maybe the 3 million years is wrong, or maybe the whole time scale is wrong. So that's the Laetoli footprints, which are quite controversial because they look as though they've been made by a modern human being walking around in some sand. Indistinguishable from modern human footprints, basically. Can't do a talk on human evolution without mentioning this guy, Homo floresiensis, otherwise called the Hobbit. Here's a skull of the Hobbit, a rather interesting creature, about 1 metre in height, hence called the Hobbit, but they seem to be bipedal, they seem to be able to stand upright. They had the brain volume is about 380 mil, which is rather small, certainly not human, more like an ape. It didn't have a chin. Another characteristic of humans which apes do not share is we all have chins. If you look at the jaw of an ape, it doesn't have a chin. You can see the chin. An ape doesn't have that. It just comes down, round, no chin. So if you have a chin, you're human. If you don't have a chin, you're not human. So just check yourselves out when you go to bed tonight in the mirror. If you've got a chin, you can be happy you're a human being. But this creature did not have a chin, which does make it debatable as to whether it should be called Homo at all. So this is another piece of evidence which is new and still evolving, if you like. New bones are being dug up. People keep going back to the same place in Indonesia and digging up more remains. But it's very recent. The conventional dating puts it at about 12,000 years. But so it can't really be evidence for the evolution of humans from apes. And some people are now suggesting, I was just reading something on the internet recently, that this possibly has descended from the Australopithecus. So there's a lot of debate about this creature, whether it was human or not. It's certainly very strange, only 1 metre high and very small-brained. I just want to mention one other fossil which illustrates some of the issues around this subject. This one only has a number. It's called AL666. It's an interesting number. 1. I've not noticed that before. It just came to me when I was reading it. And it's the maxilla, which is your upper jaw. Mandible, lower jaw, maxilla, upper jaw. Found by a gentleman called William Kimball in Hadar in Ethiopia again, where lots of these fossils are being found. And it's been dated to 2.3 million years. The interesting thing about it is it's pretty much indistinguishable from a Homo sapien jaw. But it can't be Homo sapien, we know that because it's too old. So we have a problem, and this is often the case. The Laetoli footprints is another example where you have very modern feet wandering around 3 million years ago. It doesn't actually fit the scenario. So that's the fossils. We're now going to look at some genetics. You are told confidently by a lot of people still today, surprisingly they're still doing it today, that we're about 99.5% similar to apes in our genes. You took our genes, maybe a bit less than that. But a gentleman or a team of workers led by a gentleman called Nelson, in fact no it wasn't, Nelson wrote a review of the paper, lady, Mrs. Nelson or Miss Nelson, wrote this review in Nature in 2004 in May, and the title was "Chimp Chromosome Creates Puzzles." So the idea is, you analyse a chimp chromosome, you take the human chromosome we've already decoded, and you compare the two, and you can prove evolution. So they took the bits that line up, and surprisingly, 1.44% of the individual base pairs were different, which is not surprising if you take the bits that line up. The bits that match, basically, is what they're saying. And therefore, we proved it, 1.5% different between apes and humans. Well, then if you look at the bits that don't match up, you have a problem, because they found also that 83% of 203 genes, sorry, I should have said this is for chromosome 22 of the chimpanzee, which supposedly matches chromosome 21 of the humans. So they looked at the 231 genes on this chromosome, and they found that 83% had differences. Quite small, some of them, quite major others, but 20% showed significant structural changes. So in other words, if you decode that bit of DNA and turn it into a protein, you've got a different protein structure than you had previously. So that's 20%. That's quite a big difference. That was only one chromosome. So maybe when they analyse the rest of the chromosomes, of which there are 48 in chimpanzees and other apes and only 46 in humans, which is an interesting question which I'm not going to go into. We might like to think about how an ape with 48 chromosomes becomes a human with 46. It's more difficult than you think. That's why I call this the myth of 1%. And Cohen, writing in Science in June this year, wrote about analysis of various stretches of DNA, and he basically concluded that there are stretches of DNA that have been inserted or deleted from the genomes. In other words, if you compare the chimp from the human, to get from one to the other, you have to insert and delete different bits of the gene. I would, of course, argue that no deletions or insertions have occurred, they're just different. But the evolutionary take on it is, well, we've evolved from apes rather, so therefore the bits of the genome has to be switched around. And then a group of workers led by Demuth, however he pronounces his name, published online. There's this journal here, PLOS One, can't remember what that stands for, but again, December last year. And they did a lot of analysis of human and chimpanzee genomes, and they found differences in 1,418 out of 22,000 genes. Just to save you from adding that up, that's 6.4%. So that is the latest best figure of the difference between humans and chimps in terms of DNA. We are actually 6.4% different, not 1.5% different. And that's the latest data. So the story gets more complicated. In fact, the 1.5 is one of the biggest scandals in human evolutionary research ever, based on some very dodgy data produced about 20 years ago. But these things happen.